afternoon and welcome to the SIP, our Power Hour lunch. So, ladies, do you have your lunch, your coffee, or a good sip? It is Wednesday. I am Glenda Carr from Higher Heights, and our SIP hosts are Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Fatima Goss Graves from the National Women's Law Center, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, Judith Brown Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office. So today, ladies, we are serving up a conversation about all things Black Women Lead Veep Stakes. And for those who don't know, tomorrow is Equal Pay Day for Black women. We done had to work all the way to August to get paid the same thing a white man made in 12 months. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what are the plans to make sure you can pay me my whole damn dollar on time and in full a little later on the show. But we're going to start with the internet broke yesterday at about 4 o'clock when there was a tweet. Many of us have been sitting around, those who do this for a living. And frankly, I've been talking about my very close friend who is a social worker, who literally has been every day like, anything come for me lately? Anything come for me lately? Like a VP. And so yesterday, Vice President Joe Biden, finally, after months of speculation of who was on the long list, on the short list, is he going to pick a Black woman or not? He announced his vice president running mate, and that is Senator Kamala Harris. And so we are going to spend a little time reflecting about how did you feel, ladies, when that tweet finally came across. All I know is everything blew up for me, personally and professionally, every phone, every device. So how was yesterday? How did it make you feel? What was your original reaction?
I have to say, I didn't realize I'd be as emotional as I was. I don't know if it's because I am jaded, but watching the video of her life story, thinking about what it means that my children, that young people get to see something we've never seen before. And I saw a commentator say, well, she was the safe choice. And I was like, a Black woman, the first South Asian woman, there was nothing safe about that. And that also made me feel a certain kind of way. So it was emotional to see her out there and in that role.
Well, none of them were the safe choice, right? Like none of them.
No woman was a safe choice.
Women, right? Were the safe choice at all. I mean, I think similar, Fatima, I definitely feel like there was a sense of relief, right? That it was done, that what we had just witnessed in terms of the 2 weeks of process and guessing and then vitriol and attacks and sniping, that process was done, but also relief that we gotta, there's an actual ticket that people can, hear the differences, or in some cases, stark differences between the different visions that are being put forward. So I felt mostly relief that was, definitely tied to excitement around exactly what you just described, the history of this moment, the importance, particularly in an August that's filled with anniversaries and important dates, that this just feels like, it feels like a lot and it feels overwhelming, but in a good way.
Yeah, it's funny.
Judith, before you jump in, I forgot to chime in for our lunch guests. So to share with us, how did you feel? We'd love to hear the stories from not only our viewers, but from what you've heard from your network. And if you haven't, invite someone to lunch, because this is going to be an interactive conversation. So share the feed with your network. Sorry about that, Judith. Back to our programming.
So it's funny because actually I don't know what the heck I was doing, but like Adrian texted me and she was like, "There's a pic," and I was like, "There's a pic of what? What are you talking about?" Because there was all this. Oh, it's gonna happen on Wednesdays. So Yeah, and so for me, like watching also like my Facebook page, because I'm a little younger than her, but pretty close in age. And so, so to see all the people that I know who were at Howard with her and seeing all people digging out there, I mean, they had dug out the photos, I guess, in advance, but they were posting all these great photos of her at Howard with them. Everybody, but then even like people who didn't go to Howard, everybody has a picture of her. It's kind of like the John Lewis thing. Everybody has a picture with John Lewis. So like that was just beautiful, like people like embracing like, yes, you know, like of course all the AKAs over the top, all the Howard people over the top. Even my husband, he was like, well, I was at AU, she must have known me. I'm like, oh. Anyway, because he's a Q, right? He must have known me. And so I mean, it's just beautiful. And for my daughter, right? Like the 17-year-old who's like, and literally at dinner, we're having a conversation. She's like, she's like, I think I could do that. I think I want to do that. And I was like, wow, this is beautiful. This is important.
I'll be honest, like I was in shock, I think, for a minute. It took me a minute to get to like excited because I think we've all, as Michelle Obama said, have been in this like low grade depression for months. And so when it hit, I was just like, is this real? Like what happened? Like what? Really? So it took me a minute to like process actually what was happening. And I think for those of us who do this work, day in and day out, and even Glenda and sort of the work that we've done with Higher Heights and trying to build this demand for people to respect not just Black women's labor but our leadership. Like it was like, huh, oh, okay, well, wow, that happened, and then I moved to like this excitement for her, right? This like narrative, this story, that I was that little Black girl, to see her ascent and like the hard work, the ambition, sort of paying off in that hard work. I just felt like very excited for her. And then I was like, I see you, salute, Joe Biden. You knew what was at stake on so many levels, and he could have done something different, and he didn't. And so then, all of the conversation and, the people with their commentary about whether or not this is the right pick, the easy pick, the safe pick. But we've got a game here now. Like the map is set, and so like, now we can have this conversation about what's at stake. There are two very clear options, for the country to decide on who they want to take us this way or back this way, further. And so I'm just really excited about being able to now have that discussion, to talk about her record, his record, their record collectively now in this moment. And I think that I think people are hungry for that. There are still people who don't know who she is. I was looking at the stats that MSNBC had, that 20% of the people still don't know who she is, even though she, was the front leader, in the primary. So I still think there's a lot of work to do, for them to introduce themselves to the country, but just proud, is ultimately how I, when I laid my head on my pillow last night, how I ended up feeling.
Yep. And we'll probably deep dive in this in another day. And so I'll just give my little reflection. We have some guests to reflect and talk a little bit about this moment. But I too spent the day literally, because there's all these rumors where it's like, it's not who you think it's going to be. So like our team was like changing stuff, mocking up stuff. And they had worked me up in such a frenzy, like, it cannot not be a Black woman. Like I was like, this can't be. But in my quiet space, it just reminded me that when Kimberly Peeler Allen, the other co-founder, and I sat in a Brooklyn cafe in 2011 and wrote the words Higher Heights for the first time, that, as Kamala said to us a couple of years ago, that we were built for this moment. And we celebrate obviously her being chosen, but it's also the fact that there were 6 Black women on the long list. And frankly, at the end of the day, the vice president said that there were 4 Black women on that short list. So it was a win for every single Black woman that was in consideration. And then for our work at Higher Heights, out of the 6 women that were, speculated to be on the short list, 4 of them were endorsed candidates and was part of the work that we've done since 2011. And so it was something about that moment that all things were created. Not everything was built for this. It was how Stacey Abrams' blueprint for governor created this moment. All of the women that are on presidential campaigns as senior advisors and senior staff members built this moment. It is our mothers and grandmothers who built this moment. It is the everyday Black women who literally were on social media who built this moment. It was all of the Black women leaders like the SIP host who were the architects behind the scenes that built this moment. And yesterday, what I shared with all the press that we did, today I'm not having a conversation about anything about celebrating this moment and the fact that from the legacy of Shirley Chisholm 48 years ago, she was the architect of this moment, being the first Black woman to have her name, woman and African-American to have her name entered into nomination from the floor, that Kamala Harris will have forever changed the trajectory of Black women's political leadership in this country. And that's what we celebrated yesterday, including a bunch of AKAs, my sores losing all of their minds. And so
I think your president probably didn't go to bed till 2 a.m.
Well, 2 things, because she got the 2 for, because it's the president of Alpha Kappa Alpha and the president of an HBCU.
Yeah.
And so we are so excited to bring on one of our resident contributors and girlfriends, Sonia Lockett. She's the Chief Impact Officer for One Community, or as we're going to call her, is a friend of Kamala Harris today. And Professor Nadia Brown, Associate Professor at the University of Purdue, who actually studies the conversation around women's leadership and particularly Black women's leadership. One of her latest books were called The Politics of Hair. So as we start talking about how people are going to be positioning and talking about Kamala Harris and frankly, the Black women that are running for office up and down the ballot, we thought it was important to bring on someone who's been studying this. So welcome, ladies.
Hi. So happy to be here today and celebrate with everyone.
I bet you are.
I mean, come on.
I'm gonna start with y'all's reflections.
She was one of the people who, on my Facebook page, I saw like the pictures that had been dusted off of the days at HU.
Yeah, I mean, this was yesterday. Gosh, I still get emotional thinking about it because earlier in the day on Facebook, there were all these memes and stuff about it was the anniversary of our freshman class's move-in date. And I was laughing going, now, how do people remember this 38 years later? But okay, it's our anniversary. And then to get a text later on that day that one of our friends, our classmate, is the pick for the vice president. I'm getting emotional again, but it was just amazing. It was amazing. And she's the right person for the right time. I'm so happy to not only have been part of the journey of just, you've gone through all these things with these people in college, you've had this shared experience. You push everyone forward, you cheer everyone's successes as you go on. And this was like the pinnacle. And so just as a friend, as a classmate, it was amazing. Professionally, as a board member of Higher Heights, to know that from when Glenda and Kimberly came to us about being on the board and helping them move this organization forward, this is what we were moving towards. And to know that in the short time of Higher Heights existence, like being able to put weight behind Kamala for Senate, and now, to be like in the White House is just amazing. It is a testament to who we are as Black women and what we can do as Black women. It's a testament to this organization and Glenda and Kim's leadership of gathering people to make it everyone believe this is possible. It's a testament to Howard, because that's what we do, create leaders and just the legacy of who we are at Howard. And it has been like amazing
was
day.
raised to
There's been
take
a lot of
action.
champagne popping.
mother-
There's been a lot of bragging. There's been a lot of pride. And like you said, we're celebrating right now. We're ready to get our sleeves up and get to work. And, it's just been amazing. And I want to just kind of follow up a little bit on what someone said about the idea of ambition and what had been going on around that conversation as well. Who are we not to be ambitious? That's what we are all told to be. Ambition means you're successful. Ambition means that you're excelling. Ambition means you work hard, you do the work, you get results. And that's what you want in a leader. That's what you want in a vice president. That's what you want in a PTA president, the school board president, wherever you are. And as Black women, we are always told we have to work twice as hard. And so we are ambitious. And so do not let that be a dirty word. That is not a dirty word. It's good for everybody else to be ambitious, but not for us to be ambitious. Get out of here with that. We are ambitious, and you're going to see what our ambition does for this country, because we're constantly saving this country, and we're about to save it again now. And I'm going to sip some more of my celebratory cocktail.
With your celebratory like silk on. I will have to say, there's two things I think is interesting, and we're going to have Professor Brown come in and give her reflections, because politics is such a white boys network that they know all the, they have that 6 degrees of separation that we hadn't known of. So to know that, Judith said, like, in our personal feeds, is like, yo, I know the vice president nominee, right? I got friends that know her. They got pictures of her doing all time, like, it is something about how powerful our networks are. And to see in my social feed, one of the first events we did when Senator Harris was elected to the US Senate, making her only the second Black woman to ever serve in that body, we did a women's brunch, like one of our brunches, and people took individual pictures with her. So to see everybody in my feed have the pictures from our event was really like, oh, and people were like, I can't find mine. Can you send me a copy of the one that we did back in 2017? So Nadia, what is your just thoughts as a Black woman, a woman that is roots her studies in this work? What do you think this moment is?
Hey, well, this is a watershed moment. You all are correct that I felt similarly in terms of just thrilled that a Black woman was named, that there were 4 Black women being vetted. But even more so, right, that we had choices. And this is the part that I want to hammer home, right, is that there is a deep bench of Black women political elites as candidates, elected officials, appointed officials, who were overqualified to be the vice presidential candidate. And we are not a monolith, right? So Black women had different views on which Black woman they wanted to be the VP. We had a wealth of embarrassment, right? Embarrassment of riches to pick from, to say, this is who we chose, right? This is who Black women would have supported. There were internal debates and conversations around this. So it wasn't inevitable, I think, from Black women's point of view. People, particularly in the focus groups of the women that I talk with, of who was going to be the nominee, right? And now, like the day later, we are all Team Kamala, right? We had individual discrepancies. You might have thought other Black women would have been in a better position, or they had similar policy preferences to our own. But now that Harris is the nominee, we are all Team Harris. And that speaks to what we do as Black women, right? We understand that we have to take care of ourselves, and that means taking care of one another. So it's not an either or. And I say this, right, as somebody who was not thinking about Kamala as my top choice, but she is a Bison. I am a Bison. I'm heir to that legacy. She comes from networks of the links, Alpha Kappa Alpha. I'm a Delta, right? But all Black women who are part of these networks recognize that this is an important legacy and linkages that she brings to politics and policy. So we support her. And the research bears this out, right? That we are not a monolith. We have different views and different prescriptions for policies. But at the end, we are here to support and champion a Black woman who is rose to the bottom of the ticket, the highest that we've seen ever in national politics.
So let's put her nomination in context of the moment we're in, right? We are in a moment of racial awakening, of people who may have been in denial about racial injustice, finally waking up and being like, oh yeah, we have a problem in America. So let's talk some about that. What does her nomination mean to this moment, both in terms of kind of the narrative, as well as potentially the outcome.
Right. Yeah, so I think that this is the really important part. I think it's important not to just take her nomination outside of the context, right? So we would not, I mean, I want to underscore this, we would not have a Black woman VP if it were not for the grassroots organizing and work that women, Black women and Asian American communities have done. That's first. But it's also a perfect confluence of a political event. So the Me Too movement, right, again, started by a Black woman, Tarana Burke, to really highlight the ways that marginalized groups, when women and placed at the margins, economically marginalized folks, women of color, are sexually harassed and violated. It wouldn't be a movement if we didn't talk about the Black Lives Matter, and not just thinking about George Floyd's murder, which we've seen record number of protesters, right, in the millions, which is unsurpassed, but the sustained attention to bring to justice the killers of Breonna Taylor. So this is a confluence of events that were pushing for Biden to make a Black woman a VP. Coupled with this, right, is the pandemic. Black women unfortunately bear the brunt of economic marginalization that have been part of the fallout of this economic recession that was induced by the pandemic. And then as the first Indian, right, American senator, woman senator, she is also uniquely qualified to talk to the anti-Asian and xenophobic rhetoric that's happened and racist attacks on Asian Americans because of this president's racial baiting around the coronavirus, right? So all of these things are embodied in one woman that we see that's happening in the world today. And public opinion has vastly shifted on these issues, where the majority of the American public now agree that these are issues that policymakers need to be discussing. So this was the right time for Kamala Harris, right? This was the right time for Biden to pick this person because of what's happening in the world and politics today, but also because of the sustained pressure that communities of color have put on the Democratic Party.
And I think also when you talk about looking at it from an historical perspective, we have laying the groundwork, like we have been laying this groundwork forever. When we talk about, there's been a lot of articles about, the suffragette movement and the 19th Amendment anniversary, where, we had to fight to be in that march. Like, going back to Deltas, had to fight to be in, be a part of the suffragette march. They wanted to relegate, not really have Black women as part of that. And so it has always been this push for political power for women, and Black women have always had to fight to be a part of the womanhood that we talk about when we talk about Black political power. So we have been laying the groundwork, and it's just been brick upon brick. Shirley Chisholm and everyone, Barbara Jordan, just brick upon brick upon brick. And we're at a moment, when we talk about the moment that we're in now, that we no longer are going to wait and settle and people decide that it's not our time, especially being active members and the backbone of this particular party, to say that you have all of these qualified women and you are not putting us on the ticket. And that's unacceptable to us, because we are the ones day in and day out. When you look, we're the ones who are trying to save this country every day. 94, 96% of us, 98% of us voting to make sure that this country is living up to its ideas. It's Black women. So to have a Black woman on that ticket is amazing. And then it's not just because she is a woman of color, a Black woman, she is a qualified woman. And it is not, people always want to put it in the terms of identity. Yes, that is one piece of it, but she wouldn't have gotten to where she was, and she would not be here if she was not qualified, first and foremost. And let's talk about that, because if you're going to have Sarah Palin on a ticket, and we have 55 million other women who are superiorly qualified to be in that seat, and there's all this conversation about why is it time, what's this, what's that. unacceptable, and we just weren't accepting anymore. And I'm glad that, you know, I commend once again Joe Biden for realizing the jewel he had of having all of these qualified women to pick from, and for ultimately making the choice of the woman who was the best woman at this time to be in that position.
Sonia, let's go back to your earlier comments about the ambition, right, and sort of the attempt to use the ambition as a weapon, right, against frankly all the candidates, and not just Senator Harris. But let's talk about the other kinds of attacks, right? So we know that within minutes, right, Glenda's president was out there talking about, you know, she's mean and she's nasty and she's, you know, the sort of words that he normally uses because he has such a limited vocabulary. But there's one that really stood out to me is when he called her disrespectful, right? And there is something about the use of that word when you direct it toward a Black woman that really is fundamentally about you're not in your place. And when he talked about it, he used it to talk about how she has interrogated his appointees in the Senate. And so there is this sort of like, you have no right to talk to white men in the way that you've been speaking to them, right? So there's that sort of attack. There's these sort of vulgar attacks that are sort of sexualize her in the same way that we saw those kinds of attacks on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But there is this way in which women in general, Black women in particular, have to defend themselves on multiple fronts in the political arena. So let's talk about that for a second, and what that means, and what's possible in terms of transforming the narrative around women in politics.
Yeah, I think there's so much, and I'm trying to temper my language as we discuss this. Yeah, that has been, and unfortunately, we know, I don't even want to give the orange person energy because we know how he is, but unfortunately, he's not been the only one with that language. And it has come from him. It has come from a lot of men. It has come from Black men. It has come, you know, it's just, which is extremely disheartening. And that the narrative piece, and I keep telling people, like, in this work, narrative is everything. And when people are able to construct this narrative around you, you know, they control it all. And we have to be able to take that back and construct our own narratives. I'm tired of everything gets turned around with us, especially just women, and especially women of color. If you are decisive, if you are bold, you're a bitch. You know, if you, and the attributes that you uplift in men, especially uplift in white men, you turn it and make it a detriment to Black women. And we're going to be getting that left and right, which is just unacceptable to me. And it's extremely unacceptable to me when it comes from us, who should know better and should know how it is. And my thing is always, yes, she's strong. Yes, she's decisive. Yes, that was her job, to interrogate those people who were lying at the podium. That was her job. If she didn't do that, then she was not doing her job. Then she wouldn't have been qualified to me to take on any other office if she could not do the job she had, and as part of the Judiciary Committee. So yeah, it's just, we have to constantly take that narrative back, and we have to constantly push back about that narrative. And at this point, to me, if people are saying, if that's a problem for you, my thing is also like, oh, okay, so what's the alternative? You're okay with what's happening now? Like, you're okay with the folks who would, my thing is like, they will put you back in slavery the day, January, 22nd, if they can. And so you're okay with that, but you have a problem with a woman who is strong and vocal and does her job. And we have to, like, we constantly have to fight against that in our workplaces, in everything in our professional lives, just doing our jobs and being good at our jobs, and have to fight against those narratives. And the thing is, we have to keep fighting. We have to keep fighting, and we have to keep trying to take control, and we have to try and make our own narratives, and make our narratives be the one that are out in the place, so that the press and everyone else who jumps on this don't have the power anymore
Yeah.
And we have to take the power of those narratives.
Yeah. And
if possible, can I add to this? I wanted to just quickly ground this in some scholarly conversation. So the literature shares tells us that voters actually like the approaches that Kamala Harris takes, right? That voters see Black women as being agentic leaders. They like the tough, the domineering, the take no excuses type of leadership. And they think that because of Black women's historical stereotypes as being the sapphire, that they innately will bring this to political office and represent them better. So whereas literature has shown us that white women as leaders are seen as much more weak or fickle, wishy-washy, that Black women are actually these tough kind of ball busting characters that voters think will get to Washington or the State House and forcefully support them and their issues. Now, this is the two sides of the double of a coin, right? Because we know that this stereotype comes from the Amos and Andy, she gets her name from the Amos and Andy minstrel show, right? Sapphire. And the sapphire is this emasculating, wisecracking bitch, right? She's the woman that is not kind, isn't kind to men, talks over them, and is very, very forceful. But so on the flip side, right, voters want to see this. Voters think that that kind of personality is best to represent them. But on the flip side, no one wants to be around the sapphire. She has trouble finding love and relationships. And in my own work, right, I find that legislators are having a difficult time walking this fine line, that they are trying to appeal as likable as someone that could be a sister girl, someone that could be a friend, but also want this tough image of taking no prisoners when it comes to policy formation and representing constituents.
Interesting. In fact, yesterday I heard one of the commentators call her tough. That was, you know, I heard tough, I heard smart, I heard, what is this, what's the impact on the turnout? What do you all think this is gonna do for turnout, her nomination?
Well, on one hand, I think there was a lot more excitement yesterday and today that I've heard and seen around this, you know, around Joe Biden's campaign than I had in a minute. I think there is if, you know, we do our jobs, the networks that the HBCU networks, the Divine Nine networks, all the Black women's groups and churches could get out, help get out the vote. I think there's a lot of work we still have to do, especially among young people who were, you know, who want more, who keep saying more progressive, that people aren't doing enough, that, you know, her background as a prosecutor and Joe Biden with the crime bill. And so we have to do a lot of work in that area. I think it is going to, I think her nomination helps in some respects, but I still think there's so much work we have to do to really get people turned out, because we're also in crazy time with COVID and mail-in ballots and people, you know, not knowing what's really going to happen with that, and folks once again trying to steal the elections by any means necessary. But I think it's also not just talking to people about Kamala and this presidential piece. We have to tell them, you have to get out also among all the down ballots. Like, we need you to be voting for everything. Okay, you're not that happy about this? Fine, go out, get in formation anyway. Pull the lever there, but really get excited about what's happening in your area. You have lieutenant governors that we can put in office. You have congressional people. You have your local DA races. We have to get people to understand what's going on, and that's going to still take a lot more work.
Nadia, did you want to add anything?
I know we have limited time, but if I have a crystal ball, I can look forward into to November 4th. I don't want us to put too much emphasis on turnout from this one selection. I think that we're going to see much lower turnout because of voter suppression. I don't want us to lose our eye. Like, our eye should be on making sure that every ballot is cast, that someone that wants to cast a ballot can, that voting suppression is is curtailed. So I don't want, I'm afraid, I'm so afraid that the narrative around Kamala's historic nomination will lead us to a discovery that she might not have turned out the voters that the campaign thought that she would have or should have. But instead, it was that communities of color, marginalized folks did not have the access to the ballot. And this narrative might stymie any future Black woman or woman of color on a presidential ballot in the future.
Well, thank you so much. So we want to thank our two guests, Nadia Brown and our contributor, Sonia Lockett. Look forward to seeing more of those pictures, Sonia. You're going to be keep digging them out. I'll see them on your Facebook page. Thanks for joining us for this important conversation. And we're going to turn it over to Fatima.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Yes, I have to say, Sonia, you almost had me in tears as you were sharing the journey. It was a big deal and a big day. So, and when we first started planning for the conversation that we wanted to have this week, we knew that tomorrow was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. And that is the day that Black women's wages finally catch up to the wages that white men made the year before. In other words, Black women work almost an additional 8 months into the year for their wages to be the same as the wages of typical white men. And it is worse in some states than others, but there are always surprising findings, like in Washington, D.C., which has an overall small wage gap when you compare all men and all women. It has the largest for Black women. So we wanted to dig in on Black women, their role in the workplace, what it means in this pandemic. And we brought some of the baddest experts to the table with us. We have our friend Joy Chaney from Joy Chaney Strategies, who's held a number of roles in the work, but is a longtime expert on pay discrimination and equal pay. We have Shannon Williams, who runs the Equal Pay Today project at Equal Rights Advocates, and the National Women's Law Center is a part of the steering committee for that important work. And we have Nikki Cole from One Fair Wage, who is working to ensure that tipped workers actually get a fair wage. So thank you all. But before we dig into the details of Black women's equal pay, I'm guessing that some of you have something to say about Black women's leadership today. And we see you there in your pink and green, Joy. So I do want to give you guys a moment to talk about what this day means for you as well.
Oh, thank you, Fatima. I'm so glad to be on with all of you. Ordinary day after for every member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And that's the chapter, the first chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, founded at Howard University. I am a second generation Alpha chapter member. I have my Alpha Girl pin on. My best memory with respect to my most gracious lady, Kamala Harris, is when we were in the Senate and I was sitting behind my boss, Kirsten Gillibrand, and she was sitting next to her and we were both behind, and I was talking to my boss, but I said, hold on. And I leaned over to Sora Kamala and I said, spring 1998. And she said, spring 1986. And we screamed and laughed and laughter, and everyone, including all the senators, had no idea what was going on, but it was really just between the two of us. It wasn't their business. And I love her, and I'm so excited. And really, we'll talk about it later, but what this means for Black women in the workplace, there is a nexus and an importance that we draw a connection here to all those women who didn't like the way Kamala was treated. Or won't like how she's being treated. Please, there are women who are in your own place of employment, your own friends who are treated in those same ways. And we're going to talk about that, I know. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joy. I knew you would get it in whether I asked you. So I figured, let me put this on the table, pink and green. So, but listen, I mean, Joy, you raised a question that I want to open up around ambition, because many of us, you know, we heard it with Stacey Abrams. It came up in those clear terms with Senator Harris. The idea that calling Black women ambitious can be weaponized in a way that limits your role, that keeps you in a lane, that keeps you from moving forward. The wage gap is made up of a whole range of things. And some of it is the inability to take on roles that pay more. And so it's, for some of us, it felt personal. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that relationship between ambition or other race and sex stereotypes that Black women are facing at work. What about you, Shannon?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question and a great point. I think, first of all, it's just insane for people to highlight, especially for a Black woman of color, that ambition is a bad thing. I don't remember when that's ever been something that's terrible. And it's something that, you know, that we praise in other groups. We praise it for white men. So why is this a bad thing now? I'm still, you know, just processing my excitement over Senator Kamala Harris being announced as the VP, as I'm sure a lot of people are. And I'm feeling like, you know, this morning I woke up with maybe just a little extra pep in my step. But this is exciting because, you know, now this means that our seat at the table is getting a little bigger. It's getting a little wider. And now with her as the VP nom, really helps to change the culture around women of color in leadership, especially in the government and policy space. And I know that we've already seen this happening over the last few years and the last few election cycles. But this is just the icing on the top of that cake. So I am very excited for all of this and here for everything.
Nikki, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer that question. It'd also be great if you could just share with folks, like, you know, we're talking about, you know, this gap between us and white men. Can you share a little bit on how the pay gap is actually calculated?
Sure. So the gender pay gap is measured using the current population survey outgoing rotation group microdata set, which is produced by the U.S. Census Bureau, excuse me. And it's based on years of 2017 to 2019. So it's about $8, the pay gap difference between Black women and their white male counterparts in New York and Massachusetts. It's specifically $7.75. So it's a little different state to state, but on average across the nation, it's pretty stark, and that's why we're here today talking about it.
Yeah, when you think about over the span of a lifetime, the statistics I think that always strikes me is when you look at the wage gap for Black women over the course of a career, we're talking not just cents, we're talking $1 million, that we're talking sort of generational wealth money, we're talking life-changing money. And I know, Nikki, you guys at One Fair Wage do a lot of work with tipped workers and restaurant workers. What is your sense on the relationship between the way our labor laws work, our minimum wage and hour laws work, and the wage gap for Black women?
Oh, it's directly correlated. It's and it was making me think about what we were just talking about before. There's this dominant narrative, I think, for Black women that says we are supposed to stay in our place. And policy since the Jim Crow era has done everything to try to keep Black women in place, which is below on the totem pole, right? Of economic prosperity, of health, of everything else. And so, you know, after emancipation, taking it back to the 1860s, newly freed slaves had limited job options, and in the above ground market, right? And so still domestic work, farm work, and then serving, right? In places of hospitality, newly emerging hospitality places, were some of those opportunities. And employers lobbied and set policy in place saying that Black people can work, but they're going to live off of tips, right? Or they're not going to have a guaranteed wage at all. And so all the way from emancipation to right now, the federal tip minimum wage is $2.13. And so it varies, the tip minimum wage, which is the wage paid to people that work in restaurants, right? This is servers, hosts, bartenders, also barbacks, you know, all different people that make tips. Also included are nail salon technicians and a lot of gig workers today. So it's been federally mandated that our place, people of color, and in particular women who make up 70% of the tipped positions in the hospitality industry, that our place is at $2.13, and any kind of economic advancement we make is beholden, like we're beholden to the whims of our patrons, right? And so we are working really, really hard to increase actually abolish this legacy of slavery, to get rid of a sub minimum wage and make one full minimum wage for everyone, plus tips on top. We don't want to take away people's tips because that's a cultural custom, but we want everyone to have at least this equal pay shot. So this would eliminate a lot of the pay gap that women, Black women, Latino women, Asian women, right? White women too face in the hospitality industry on an hourly basis, on a monthly, on a yearly, on a collective wealth basis.
You know, Nikki, you just brought up something about sort of the cultural context, you know, as it relates to policy. I mean, I believe that like one of the other cultural things that we have to tend to is just how Black women are taught to engage, right, around money, right? It's not polite to talk about money. You don't talk about how much you're getting paid. Don't go in there asking for a raise. Just be happy you have a job like that culturally, right? You're not taught on how to negotiate, you know, for a salary and raise. I remember when I first started school out, you know, who's supposed to, how much am I supposed to ask for? Like, we don't have those kind of conversations, and we don't equip our folk with the tools to be able to, it's not just about negotiation. Of course, it's about the policies and the historical aspect of it, but there's also the culture of how, you know, this shows up in our community. Shannon, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the myths that exist around the sort of gender pay gap? And the other piece is people like, there's no pay gap. Like, what are y'all talking about? Like, y'all getting paid the same. Like, no, I know Bob making more than me. So like, let's talk about it, shall we?
Yeah, let's talk about it. And your comment about not talking about pay almost made me chuckle, because I can hear my grandmother now. Baby, would you talk about how much you make?
Don't talk about how much you make. Right.
Talk about how much you make. But we have to get rid of that. But then we can talk about that later. But I'm really glad that you asked that question about the myths of the gender pay gap, because it's such an important piece to address, especially in the work that all of us are really committed to doing. There's so many misconceptions about the gender wage gap. The first big one, I think maybe the most obvious, is really just that it's fake, that it just doesn't exist. But people who seem to think that the wage gap is a myth are typically the people who are benefiting from that gap. So we have to dispel that. And we know the reality is the wage gap does exist, and that this gap is getting wider for women of color who find themselves sitting at the intersection of gender and race discrimination. So when you compound those two, the gap just gets exponentially wider. And specifically for Black women who, as Fatima mentioned at the top of the segment, are earning just 62 cents on the dollar to their white non-Hispanic male counterparts. And with 80% of Black mothers being the sole or co or primary breadwinners for their household, the wage gap is very real and it's a very harmful thing. And it's not just to women, but it's in the communities that we live and where we thrive and in our structure as well. Another misconception about the wage gap is that women are just paid less because of the jobs they choose, and that we tend to choose lower paying careers more so than men choose, which is just generally insulting because it's insinuating that first, women make bad choices for themselves, and that's just not the case. The wage gap we know exists in every industry, nearly every profession, regardless of education and regardless of years of experience. And women in male-dominated jobs, they still face a pay gap too, especially in comparison, of course, to their male counterparts. And again, when you compound that gender and race piece, that gap just gets wider. And since we are talking about education right now, that's another myth that we got to get rid of, that education is going to be the great equalizer and it's going to solve all of the issues dealing with the wage gap. Not the case. Women that are graduating with college degrees compared to the men that are graduating are still paid less. And we know women are graduating with more college degrees than men. So we gotta get rid of that. And we still see gender and race wage gaps in professions with women with postgraduate degrees, law degrees, medical degrees. So this is across all sectors, all education levels, all professions. And lastly, you did mention this and want to dive a little deeper into that we just don't ask for raises and that we just don't know how to negotiate. And that's just completely false. Women ask for raises just as much as men. We know how to negotiate. And recent studies really just disprove this and take this out because it shows that women are asking for raises just as often, if not more than men. We're just less likely to receive those raises.
You know, one of the things that I think is really interesting about that is that the myths aren't so disconnected with the fact that the pay gap is complicated. There's not just one solution to the pay gap. And I know, Joy, you've had a lot of time to think through these solutions, but what's your top 5? Like if people said you got 5 things you can do to make it so that Black women are paid more, paid their worth, what would you say?
All right, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to vote in November. And here's why. We have to elect people who are going to promote the policies and pass the policies that will close the gender wage gap and the gender and racial wage gap. So we want to, when you're looking for who you want to support, you're looking for people who are supporting the Paycheck Fairness Act. Okay, if we have time, we'll go back and talk about what that is, but you just trust me, Paycheck Fairness Act, because it closes loopholes that have allowed your employers to disparately pay you with little consequence. It also ensures that we're banning the use of salary history in setting salaries for new employees and people who are being promoted. That only perpetuates the pay gap. It also has stricter policies around retaliation. And it also collects pay data on the basis of race and sex and ethnicity, which is critical. If you do not measure, how do you not know? Our president likes not to measure things, and then perhaps you don't know. But just like we see the effects of what happens with COVID, you also know what's in your paycheck. So that's really important. Paid leave is also important. So we talked about the Paycheck Fairness Act. We also want to talk about paid leave, which is also a really important bill that will ensure that there is paid leave for women who otherwise will have to come out of the workforce and would lose their salaries. Not everyone is able to take off and be paid. So we want to address that. We want to make sure, and I know Nikki will nod, that we are raising the minimum wage and then eliminating that discriminatory tipped wage, which we've already discussed. We also want to right now, though, like today, like what you could be doing today. We're going to vote in November, but you're also going to insist that your members of Congress pass a stimulus bill before they skirt out of town. And that's because we haven't focused as much on this today, but we've done, I know that the SIP has done this before. Black women are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And the jobs that we are in are disproportionately being impacted by it. And if state and local governments do not have an infusion of money from the federal government, they are going to lay off frontline workers who are working at the state and local level. And that will disproportionately impact Black women. And at the same time, if we're unemployed, well, you know, they're saying that we won't even get the $600 per week extra that is necessary in order to address this crisis and to close the gap that's been caused by this crisis. So on all fronts, we need to be ensuring that our members of Congress have us in mind. And when we have a stimulus package, a COVID stimulus package that will address some of those things, and we can do that right now. So I hope you're doing that, and I hope you're voting. And then one other thing, if you are an employer or you have the ability to say it at your workplace, we want you to encourage your employer to stop focusing on what you made in your last job. And we also want to make sure that we're listing the pay ranges on